For more on this story, then, we're going to cross now to Richard Ports, professor of economics at the London Business School. Thank you very much for joining us, Professor Ports. So what do you think is behind this U-turn? Why now? Some people saying this was probably on the cards all along. Others saying that this is Trump reacting to the state of the markets. What do you think is behind this?
First of all, my name is Portis, not Ports.
Excuse me.
But,
sorry about that.
Let's go on from that. That's okay. He's totally unpredictable, totally chaotic, varies from one moment to the next, depends who has his ear, who doesn't. And that's the first lesson. The second lesson is that he will back down when he's faced by forces that he can't control. In this case, what was the force? It was the bond market vigilantes, as we say. He was really concerned, and his following, his people, had made him concerned that the bond market was on the verge of total crisis. And that could bring a financial crisis, not just for the US, but globally. Whether he would back down, he will back down in the face of resistance from Xi Jinping, that is another question. The third point I would make, and I think it's very important, is that although the so-called reciprocal tariffs have been delayed by 90 days, paused, we would say, perhaps, although they've been delayed, the remaining levels of tariffs are still very high, much higher than before Trump came back into office. And that will have big effects on the US economy, on inflation, and abroad.
So where do you think this leaves things then? Do you think that the sense of relief will be long lasting?
No, I don't, because as I say, he's unpredictable. Tomorrow he might say, "Oh, we're back to square one." So that's the first thing, first reaction one has. Second, I think the turmoil in the bond markets has not been banished. The turmoil in the equity markets has not been banished. If you look back, when we've seen these rebounds, they're very often short-lived. And the uncertainty that Trump has created is weighing down on equity prices, on the bond markets. It's that uncertainty going forward that will affect the American economy very detrimentally, and the rest of the world.
Speaking of uncertainty, Professor Portis, what do you think is more harmful then, at least in the mid to long term, in this entire tariff saga? Do you think it's the risk, the consequences of the tariffs themselves, or is it the uncertainty that surrounded them?
I think it's hard to say. It's both. The uncertainty really will hinder business investment. And that's what he wants, more investment. Good luck. Nobody now will take seriously any suggestions of stability in American economic policy. And you have to take account of that when you're investing, when you're thinking about investing in the United States. And that goes for foreigners and domestic investors as well. So I think the uncertainty that he has created is going to hit investment very, very substantially.
So China, we know, is now the main target. Who do you think has the upper hand at this point? If we put, Donald Trump's unpredictability aside for the moment, who is more likely to bring a solution to the table, Washington or Beijing?
I wish I could answer that. The problem is that, yes, on the whole, on balance, the economic forces are tougher for China than the United States in this tariff war. And there are various reasons for that I needn't go into. But on the other hand, China has a lot of other cards to play in restricting its own exports, for example, of materials and goods that are vital to the American economy. And broader than that, besides the economic issues, China has various cards to play in the South China Sea, around Taiwan, and more broadly abroad. So that I don't think that Xi Jinping lacks instruments to hit back at the United States if that's what he has to do. and he's not going to back down. Trump may eventually back down, but he's not going to back down. And what's important, what you'd like to see going forward, is some seasoned diplomats putting forward off-ramps that will permit both sides to say, well, yes, we went to this extreme, and now we're trying to calm things down, cool things down. The trouble is, of course, that Trump does not have an experienced diplomat team. He doesn't have people that can deal effectively with this sort of subtle diplomatic interchange. So I'm not confident of that.
What do you think that those off-ramps that you mentioned there would look like? Or should look like, rather?
Well, that's for the diplomats, honestly. It's not for a professor of economics. This is politics. And I would hesitate to say how you could negotiate some kind of face-saving solution, face-saving for both sides, because this goes beyond what an economist can sensibly say.
So as an economist, though, then as a final question for you, Professor, there's obviously been this longstanding debate about the winners and losers in this so-called globalization era. Now, while addressing that maybe isn't what Donald Trump has had in mind throughout this whole saga, do you think that in the long term, tariffs could indeed address some of these perceived injustices?
Well, they are perceived injustices. Running a trade deficit with another country is not an injustice. The whole story about international trade is that it makes both sides better off. There may be knock-on effects in the jobs markets and so forth, and you should be able to deal with those. But overall, trade, because it's voluntary, nobody forces you to trade. So trade is beneficial to the buyer and to the seller. If you shut that down, it's a cost to both sides. And that's what we don't want to see. Because if we go in that direction, we give up all the gains that came from the post-war, post-Second World War opening of markets. And if you look back at history, that was a tremendously vital, growing world economy, growing American economy, growing European economy, and of course, for China, immense growth once they changed their policies in the early 1980s.
Professor of Economics at London Business School, Richard Portes, thank you very much for coming on the show today.